I think this debate is very timely, partly because, of course, we are shortly to have change in our own politics, and I'm sure that when the Prime Minister stands down, a big part of the assessment will be about foreign and security policy. And there is a strong current of opinion in this country that believes that the foreign policy pursued by Tony Blair has made Britain and indeed the world a more dangerous place. In its more forthright versions, this strand of opinion concludes that when there is a terrorist act here in the UK, or the bombing of a marketplace in Baghdad, that we are to blame, that somehow we have brought this on ourselves. And I want to make a few points today about this worldview, why I believe it's wrong, and why I believe the case for liberal interventionism will continue after Tony Blair has gone. My first point is that we should reject the notion that we are to blame for these terrorist outrages, that these acts driven by extremist ideology are somehow our fault. Every nation is responsible for its own actions, and so too are those who bomb the London Underground or bomb marketplaces in Baghdad. These actions are not some automatic response to British or American foreign policy. They are carried out by sane individuals acting on their own world view. And I believe that the urge to blame ourselves, which exists in large parts of the West, strips responsibility from those who carry out these bombings, and also inhibits us from understanding fully what we are up against in terms of terrorist acts abroad and a threat here in the UK. There is nothing inevitable about bombing marketplaces and killing hundreds of people. There is nothing inevitable about killing trade unionists or people joining the police or others trying to engage in rebuilding their country. People chose to carry out these acts, and they are an outrage against universal, and I stress universal, values of human decency. I also think that the urge to absolve those responsible from answering for their own actions unwittingly fits in with the ideology which drives this violence, because those who carry out these acts are driven by a belief in a grand conspiracy against Islam, which revels in portraying themselves as the perennial victim. And so conflicts from Chechnya to Palestine to Iraq are all seized on to show the wickedness of the West, and all seized on as though they were unified by a single theme. And much of the ideology behind this was bottled up during the Cold War, but it's now widespread in the world. And importantly, it was leading people to commit terrorist outrages before either President Bush or Tony Blair took office. And the threat that it poses will remain when both of them have gone. And those who drive this ideology know well that this instinct for self-blame exists in the West. They play to it constantly. I believe it's time we treated everyone involved as adults, as capable of reason as anyone else, and not as victims. This is not just in our own interests, but also in the interests of those parts of the world where victimhood is perhaps most strongly felt, because in the end, victimhood is the opposite of leadership, and we are all responsible for our own destinies. Another thing I want to say today is to be optimistic, to say that there's much in the world to give rise to hope. Liberalism, pluralism, and democracy are values worth standing up for. I don't believe they are exclusive to the West. The idea of freedom of religion and the freedom to have no religion, if one so chooses, is an important freedom. It's enjoyed here in Britain, so too is freedom of choice, freedom of association, and a free press. Those who attack our society may hate these freedoms, and they have said they do so on more than one occasion, but we will defend them. And critics of our stance here in Britain or other Western countries sometimes point to inconsistencies in policy. They argue, for example, that action in one area is illegitimate unless we take action in all areas. But because we do not act everywhere, it doesn't mean that action is always wrong. Because to believe that is in the end a counsel of paralysis, and it would lead us to turn away from those who are most deserving of our support in the world. It will remain necessary both to defend our values and to reach out to others, and to be strong and vigilant in the face of the security threat facing our country in the future. Simply hoping it will all go away will not work. So when we look back at Britain's record in recent years, as inevitably we do at a time of change, we should take pride that we've led the way in putting issues of poverty, debt, HIV and climate change at the centre of world debate. But we should also take pride that our troops in recent years have helped stop ethnic cleansing and are supporting nascent, struggling democracies. And it is this combination which we will need in the times ahead. Tony Blair has argued this case around the world in recent years in the face of much opposition, and Gordon Brown too has spoken out strongly in security. And at this time of change, I want to be clear that there are others who will continue to speak out on this agenda in the future, both addressing the long-term causes of injustice and a willingness to act. Both of these are at the heart of liberal intervention, and I believe they will remain so. And we've got to keep making this case for as long as the issues and the threats that gave rise to it remain. Thanks.
Thank you, Pat. We've had a question in posed to you, and you do touch on it briefly. It's how do we persuade a sceptical public post-Iraq that humanitarian intervention is justifiable?
I think in two ways. On Iraq, I think it is important that we're clear that those who are carrying out these atrocities are those who are responsible for them. I think there's been an instinct to say that this is all our fault, and I think that whatever people thought of the decision to invade Iraq, whether they were for it or against it, it should not be difficult to decide who you support and what side you're on in terms of the chaos that is currently going on in Iraq. And I also think that were we to conclude from the violence and the murder that takes place in Iraq on a daily basis that liberal interventionism was wrong, that we could not give hope and comfort to others suffering under dictatorships, and we couldn't reach out to those deserving of our support in the world, that would be a tragic conclusion.